far, we have been running our Cypress tests by opening the Cypress window and clicking on a test file. This isn't exactly automated. We want to be able to run our tests through the command line because once we have that command, we can use it with an integration tool like CircleCI, Jenkins, or TeamCity. So today we will learn how to run our tests from the command line. We'll also learn how to handle situations where we need to test in different environments like QA and production through using config files. Let's get started. Running Cypress tests from the command line is super easy. All you have to do is type npx Cypress run, and your tests will start running. So these are running headless, which means that there's no visual component of a browser to look at. You can see that our add contact tests have run and passed, and delete contact. Now update contact. And at the end of the test run, you will get a little chart like this that shows you how many tests ran and how many were passing and how long they took to run. Now we can also put a special script in our package.json file to run these tests as well. So if we open up our package.json file, we can see we've already got one command here, which is test, which runs the npx Cypress open command. We put a comma at the end of that line, and let's say headless, because those are the headless tests. And then we just type in npx Cypress run. Now, if we type the command npm run headless, it will execute the npx Cypress run command. While those are running, let's take a look at our Cypress config file. In the config file, we can add variables instead of hard-coding variable values in our tests or in our commands. So what we're going to do is, if we open up our commands.js file, we'll see that we've got a login command where we have hard-coded the email and the password. Well, what if we want to use a different email and password depending on what environment we are testing in? Well, because of that, we are going to make these into variables, and then we can use our config file to pass the variables into our tests. So in our config.js file, right after this comma and before the very last curly brace parenthesis combo, we're going to type in env and then a set of curly braces, and then we can type in our variable names and values. So we'll put in username. And so for me, my username is mondaymorning1@fake.com, and then a comma, and then we'll put in a password, and my password is foobarfoo. And then we'll save. So now we can go back to our commands file, and instead of saying type mondaymorning1@fake.com, now we can just say type cypress.env and then username. So this is how you call a Cypress environment variable that is in the cypress.config.js file. And we'll do the same thing for the password. Cypress.env password. Okay, we'll save. And let's run our tests again with npm run headless and see if they still pass. All of our tests should be affected because all of our tests are using login. So let's see if they all pass. And they've passed. So when we run our Cypress tests with that npx command, what they do is they assume that this cypress.config.js file is the configuration file to use. So what should you do if you have more than one environment to test in? The website that we are using for our testing only has one environment, which is the production environment. But let's imagine that it had a QA environment that we also wanted to run our tests in. And let's also imagine that in that environment, the username and the password were going to be different. So this is what we will do. We will create a new config file, and we are just going to copy this file and then paste. Okay, now we've got a copy. Let's rename. We will call this qa.config.js. Okay, and let's take a look. So we've got our structure here to set up the config file, and then we also have our username and password variables. But as I mentioned in our imaginary QA config file, which is really just still pointing to our regular production website, I have a different username and password. So I'm going to put in Monday morning 2 at fake.com and another password, which is another password. So now we need to tell Cypress to point to this config file if we want to run with these variables. And the way that we do that is through the command to run the Cypress tests. So what we will do is we will type npx Cypress open. We're going to run these in the browser so that we can see what's happening. And then -C, and then qa.config.js. So I'm passing in the file that we want to use for the configuration. So now Cypress will open. And let's run our add contact test, and we'll watch closely to see if we are logging in with that second user, our QA environment user. Yep, and it looks like we are. I saw Monday morning 2. Yep, there it is again. And our tests ran and passed. So now what we can do is we can go into the package.json file and we can add in a couple more scripts. So let's put in QA test as one of our scripts. And for that, we will say npx Cypress open -C and then qa.config.js. And then a comma. And then after headless, we'll write QA headless with npx Cypress run -C qa.config.js. And we will save. And so now let's see if one of our new scripts works. So let's run the QA headless script and see if everything runs and passes. So we will say npm run QA headless. Okay, and it looks like we had one failure. And I thought I would leave this failure in just to show you why we're getting it. So let's go to our website. And we're going to log in with that new user that I created. And we can see that because we had never created a contact before, the contact list is empty, so there's no table rows. Because we've been very careful with our test data and we are always deleting any data that we create, there's no contacts in here to have a table for verifying when we've deleted a contact that it's not in there. It doesn't have any table rows to look at. So the way we would fix that is just by adding a new contact, or we could change the test. Either way, that would cause that particular test to pass. You might also need to have a different URL that your tests are pointing to, depending on whether you are in a QA or a production environment. As I mentioned, this particular website does not have a QA environment, but let's pretend that it did. So what we would do is, and actually I'm going to put this in the production environment, I would put in the URL like this. We'll just copy from the command. I'll put it right in here. And then we would do the same in the QA config. We would have a value URL and we would change it to whatever the QA environment was. And then in our login command, instead of saying cy visit with the URL, we would say instead cy.visit cypress.env URL. And so then it would put in whatever the URL was for the environment that we were going to test with. So let's run that. Since I put that variable into the production, the regular cypress.config.js file, let's just run that file. So we'll say npm run headless, and we'll see if the tests run and pass. And they pass, so that means that the URL variable was substituted correctly. Thanks for watching this video. If you found my training helpful, please like this video and share it with others. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single lesson. If you're enjoying Monday Morning Automation and you'd like to learn even faster, be sure to check out my book, The Complete Software Tester, which is available in Kindle and paperback on Amazon.com.